Greetings, friends. It's Friday, December 1st. And on today's program, we are going to be taking the opportunity given us by current events and the release of a certain film to consider one of the great men of history and examine what we mean when we say someone is great. Is greatness bestowed by destiny, or do men simply respond to the circumstances they're born into? And when considering the sum total of one man's deeds and work, can one really be said to be great despite causing so much horror and misery? And at the end of the day, isn't the greatness of this supposedly great man massively overstated? I am referring, of course, to the director Ridley Scott. Joining us on today's episode to discuss Ridley Scott. No, just kidding. We're talking about Napoleon today, and joining us today is the greatest Napoleon expert that we know, the host of Age of Napoleon, our good friend, Everett Rummage. Everett, welcome back to the show.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me back.
Now, you are having you back, and I should say at the top of this episode that this episode is something of a sequel to Chapo episode 89, all the way back from March 2017, Napoleonic Rules for Success in Business, where, Everett, we had you on to discuss Ridley Scott's first movie, The Duelists, which also takes place in the Napoleonic era. And now, to close the circle, to have you back to discuss Ridley Scott's latest movie about the man himself, Napoleon. But actually, before we get into Napoleon, I suppose I should briefly mention the passing of another great man of history, Dr. Henry Kissinger. And I'd just like to say, we've been expecting this for a long time now. And, had he died in the 90s, I think the feeling I might have felt a little differently about this. But the fact of the matter is, he died at 100, probably on a great cocktail of drugs, alone. He's probably with family, feeling loved, just drifting off into the ether, never having felt a moment's discomfort for anything he'd done in his life. And I'd like to say that that's totally appropriate because the man was a number one pussy getter of all time, despite being ugly as fuck. And number two, a peaceful death after a life well lived is something that I think anyone who has spent his entire life as a conscious agent of international communism deserves. So R.I.P. Henry.
I've been dreading this day just because it would be it's kind of like, when mass shootings were a big thing on Twitter and everyone would post, people, please just be fucking kind to each other. How hard is it? It's the same type of thing. Henry Kissinger is he's the one bad foreign policy guy that stupid people know about. So you're just going to see the worst fucking posts of all time. And it's especially annoying when someone who's bad lives till 190 and people are like, oh, you got corn cobbed. It really sucks dick. But, he's gone. He outlasted Reagan and the Reagan delegation. Those are the people that discovered he was a communist agent. And he won.
He won. I mean, just look at China today. I mean, he was the one that saw the hope for humanity's future lay with Comrade Mao Zedong. I guess I think Mark Ames said it best when it was just I'm reading all these obituaries about him. The most annoying tick that people have is to describe him as an evil Machiavellian genius, to be like, oh, he did some bad things, but he was truly a ruthless, realist political mastermind. And he really wasn't. I mean, he was really kind of just, if he had one skill above all else, it was flattery for those in power. And if he had one belief above everything else, it certainly wasn't realism or anything like that. It was just that he should be in power. And it doesn't really matter what he was doing as long as he was the guy in the room. And I just like the fact that he spent probably the last 50 years of his life just going to parties in New York and DC and having people suck him off just shows how good he was at that.
Well, I just the idea that oh my God, this guy was able to get other countries to do what America wanted. He has to be fucking the smartest man ever. Who could do that? Who could pull that off?
I mean, I'll say this for him. He did have that sort of educated European, ability to seem smart. I mean, he was, a curious person who read books and was able to express himself with big words. And if it's a pretty low bar for the American foreign policy establishment. So, compared to a lot of the people we've had in those roles, yeah, he does seem kind of like a genius, doesn't he?
I mean, in that regard, he shares it with. So he shares something of a similar characteristic with his longtime antagonist, Christopher Hitchens, which is that basically Americans will think you're an evil genius if you speak in a foreign language, and it doesn't really matter what you're saying or doing. And I guess I don't know. Like I think people, the way people talk about him, certainly in his obituaries, is that like he was the American century incarnate, and I think there's a certain truth to that. Being born in Germany, rising up, kissing ass all the way to Harvard. Destroying the Paris peace talks and prolonging the Vietnam War another 5 or 6 years. But like, I mean, he really did the most with ass kissing and being thought of as smart and cool. And he did get laid a lot. So, I mean, I think like in the grand total of a man's life, I think you do need to take that into consideration along with, East Timor and Cambodia.
Do you think that he saw like Anthony Blinken, his the jazz minstrel show that Blinken was doing?
I think that's probably the last thing he saw.
Yeah.
I think they showed that to him like Edward G. Robinson and Soylent Green.
Can I just say how amazing it is that that's like the last thing Blinken did before?
Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah. He's like smooth sailing. Nothing's going on for the rest of this year. Time to become the blues man. And then just put down the guitar, Tony. You're not gonna have any time left to do that for the rest of the year.
And you look at him now, and he's just so deflated and defeated, and that he wants to be back on that stage.
He's probably trying to like find excuses to do it more. He's like he's talking to like Netanyahu's cabinet, and he's like, "Well, what if I did a jazz benefit concert for the victims of 10/7?"
He's going to be like the David Hasselhoff playing at the Berlin Wall between Gaza and Palestine. And doing the Billy Crystal
Berlin Wall
blues
coming
man
down. He's going to be playing the cotton picking blues at the erection of the new wall to cordon off the Sinai Desert concentration camp.
Do you think that like Kissinger saw that and was like, why didn't I get to do that?
Why didn't I learn to play guitar? I could have gotten laid so much more.
He just really wanted to be the blues man.
Kissinger famously said power is the ultimate aphrodisiac, but he wasn't counting on a blues rock cover.
Yeah. No, I would be surprised if Anthony Blinken is putting up anything less than Wilt Chamberlain numbers.
What he needs is a strategist. A man of his prestige cannot simply go after an enemy all willy-nilly.
He can't give an enemy a free willy what?
What you need is a second in command who understands the intricacies of organized villainy. This I can offer you.
Perfect! You're hired, Number
Killinger. Dr. Henry Killinger. And this is my magic murder bag.
Well, I mean, it's sort of sickening to me because, like, Kissinger was a guy whose, like, one real skill was encouraging the belief among Americans that he was a smart genius and mastermind, and he was, like, in that he had power, and that he was a man who exercised power. And I think, like, I'm sure in some sense he would like to be mentioned or have his death mentioned on an episode where we discussed Napoleon. Probably... the guy who all powerful men here after Napoleon's death sort of like in some way or another compare themselves to or measure themselves against. And I guess like this is my way of introducing both Napoleon, the historical figure, and Ridley Scott's movie about it. I remember a couple weeks ago on the internet, there was a big joke going around that like women finding out and like having it be confirmed that all of the men in their lives are at some point in the day thinking about the Roman Empire. And just discovering that, like, oh, men everywhere are constantly thinking about the Roman Empire. Wrong, not true. Boys are thinking about Rome. Men are thinking about the Napoleonic age. Ev, I'm sure you would agree with me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I actually do. I mean, kidding aside, I do think it does make me happy to see people talking about this story again because, I mean, it is, obviously it's crazy to say that, one man founded the modern world. But like, if there is one story to know, to understand the modern world, I would say it's this one.
I mean, it's history upon horseback. I mean, he was the guy. But like, the question is, was he what was he really great? Was he Napoleon the Emperor, or was he Lefraudlian? You have a thought on that? Was he Lefraud? Did he have Mickey Mouse victories, or was he the real deal? Was he truly the GOAT?
I mean, like anything with Napoleon, the answer is kind of both. This movie very much gave you the sort of like farcical side of his character and his story, which is definitely there. But then, the sort of the myth that he built around himself, the Napoleonic legend, that is based in reality. He really did do, most of those things in, that sort of grand narrative. So kind of it's both at the same time. It is a total farce, but it's also, it's the crucible that built the modern world. So there is that very serious element as well.
All right. So just to dive into the movie, like Everett, you've been doing the Age of Napoleon. Like you are a Napoleon expert. Like you've been doing this show for years now. What, like, as the official Chapo Napoleon expert, what was your overall impression of Ridley Scott's film?
Well, so it's probably gonna sound like I did not enjoy this movie. So I'll say up front that I actually did quite enjoy the experience watching it. That said, when Ridley Scott was interviewed before the movie came out and was talking about how, he wasn't thinking about historical accuracy and he didn't care what historians had to say, that definitely shows on the screen. The movie is completely crazy. The pacing is like, absolutely a sprint. That nothing happens on the screen the way it happened in real life. I mean, I could spend the whole rest of this episode just listing all the things that, they made up or got wrong. And so it's a crazy experience, like almost like it's a hallucination. I don't think they really get much at sort of what made Napoleon great. It's more, like I said, just kind of the farcical side of the story. But it's fun. I actually had a good time watching it. It's interesting to watch, even though it's kind of a disaster in some ways.
I mean, previous film treatments of Napoleon's life are like the ones that are serious are either is the Abel Gance silent film from 1929 that is 6 hours long and you need 3 projectors to watch. But then like that is an adaptation of his whole life and it's 6 hours long. And the other ones, like the Rod Steiger one, Waterloo, are about like discrete engagements. So, and then repeatedly, like, I mean, I can't help but see this movie as Ridley Scott forever in his entire career, from The Duelist to now, trying to catch up to Stanley Kubrick. Because Kubrick had reportedly wanted to do a Napoleon biopic. And apparently, I remember Matt told me he read the screenplay for it a while ago. And the way that it handled his Napoleon's life in the Kubrick version was sort of similar to this. It was very episodic. It just sort of accepted that it was like, here are 8 or 9 like discrete incidents from his life, but we're not going to really do much to fill in the gaps in between it, because like it's just the sheer scope of everything Napoleon did in his life is just, it's impossible to fit into like a narrative film unless it's 6 hours long.
Yeah, I mean, even I've got over 100 hours under my belt, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface.
My take on this film is that Ridley Scott needs to be sent into some sort of cinematic exile. Like if there is a movie equivalent of Elba or St. Helena, we've got to send this old British man there before. Apple giving him 280 million. How much money did this fucking movie cost? They're giving him billions of dollars to make these movies, and they are all so fucking tedious. I suppose I should say the things that I did like about this movie, which were the battle scenes. I mean, obviously that's what Ridley Scott does. They deliver. And Ev, I know much was made about probably the signature scene in this movie when he unleashes a cannon volley into a frozen lake and like sinks like hundreds of Austrian soldiers. I know that didn't happen, but that's not kind of like the historical accuracy I care about in movies, because I'm like, if it looks cool, I'm okay with it being in a movie.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That scene, it's funny that like the thing with the lakes, they've pretty much proven now it didn't happen. But weirdly, like memoirs of French soldiers who fought in that battle, a lot of them mention that. So that's like, it's not actually authentic, but it's like an authentic urban legend from the actual time of the battle, which is actually kind of cool, I think. And it was really like breathtaking on the screen, all those shots of the guy sinking down. So I was actually fine with that, even though it is totally made up.
I would also say, just from doing like Hell on Earth, anything that you can put on screen that captures how horrifying and miserable any aspect of being in a early modern or pre-modern battle would be, even if it is of marginal, direct factualness, I think is an overall plus.
Oh yeah, I mean, like it was appropriately terrifying. Because another check I will give this movie, despite my solid Ridley Scott hater status, is that this movie does do a good job of depicting what it's like when a fucking cannon shot hits a human body at like 10 feet. Because oh my god, there are some really some cannonball hits in this movie that are pretty impressive. And it's just like, how much like Everett? How much does the average cannonball weigh? Like they would fire in those volleys?
Well, I mean, it varied. Kind of the standard is either 8 or 12 pounds. But the really terrifying, the shot of 13 Vendémiaire when he fires into the crowd. In reality, it was not a crowd. It was mostly mutinying soldiers. So that was 100 of Napoleon's guys died in that battle. So it was not a defenseless crowd by any means. But those cannon were firing grape shot, which is basically like a gigantic shotgun shell. So it's just spraying like debris and little tiny musket balls. And yeah, they were horrifying. There's a account I read of a battle once where the French were maneuvering with their bayonets on and their guns on their shoulders. So the bayonets up in the air. And people could hear this weird rattling sound and no one could figure out what it was. And it was grape shot rounds bouncing off the bayonets, just like, sounded like rain on a tin roof. And it would have been absolutely terrifying to be exposed to that. I mean, that's one of those things that even seasoned soldiers would be stopped dead when they got hit by that stuff, because it's just horrifying to see that many people get mowed down all at once.
Felix, do you have thoughts on the movie?
I didn't see it.
Oh, okay. Your thoughts on Napoleon, Felix? Lafraudlian or not?
He gave it his best. Unlike Ridley Scott. No, I'm a Napoleon supporter. I always have been.
Well, I guess that's another thing I appreciated about the release of this movie, Ev, is that like in the reviews of the movie, we got a little treatment of the sort of the ongoing historical battle over like who can claim and condemn Napoleon in the modern era. And it seems like it mostly does break down on, are you English or French? And one of my favorite things about you doing the show is hearing from you about irate British listeners who will always nitpick every detail that perhaps depicts Napoleon as something other than a Hitler-like monster.
Yeah, that's something I was really not expecting when I started the show. To me, I'm not like rooting for people in this. To me, that like, it's like reading the Iliad and going, I hate Odysseus so much. It's ancient history. It's very interesting history, and it's a great story. But, I'm not really here to make moral judgments on these people. But as it turns out, quite a lot of people who are into this stuff, that is what they're into it for, is they really feel very strongly that, typically I encounter the Brits who, as you said, really think of him as this kind of buffoon caricature / evil monster. And, it's, no one is that simplistic a character, especially not someone with as strange and varied a career as Napoleon.
Well, I will say that in this movie, Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Napoleon was, I've not studied anywhere like close to anything about Napoleon, but I will just say that his presentation of Napoleon was a bit odd to me. It seemed to be like he was portrayed in this movie as basically being an artillery autist and like a sexual dysfunctional. Like it seemed to like the movie heavily implied that his world bestriding destiny was driven by a sense of sexual inadequacy.
If you look down, you'll see a surprise. Once you see it, you will always want it.
Yeah, that was kind of an odd, there was a moment in his relationship with Josephine where it was sort of like that very early in their relationship. But so they correctly depict that he was an extremely horny man. And he was the most famous European for centuries. So I'll put it this way. I once saw two historians debate whether or not Napoleon had slept with over 1,000 women. So that should have been at the end when they put up the body counts. That should have been the body count they put up at the screen at the end, because he was between when he first got famous and when he was exiled. I once read a story of a guy who had to deliver a lot of messages to Napoleon's headquarters, and a lot of times when you delivered a message, from a general or a marshal to Napoleon, your orders would be, put this in his hands and watch him read it and then come back with the response. So you had to actually get like a second of FaceTime with Napoleon to deliver these letters. And so the guy is in this special waiting room with mostly other messengers who are, have the same orders of, it's basically a waiting room for people who need 5 minutes with him. And sometimes when that would happen, there would just be like an actress or an opera singer in the waiting room, just waiting her turn with the emperor.
Oh, Kissinger wishes. Well, I mean, basically, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Jill St. Clair. Well, I mean, he is astonishingly horny in this movie, and I've actually Jacob Bacharach said the movie actually underplayed how both cucked and horny he was. Are we correcting him on the record now? Or I mean, most of the movie is about him and Josephine's relationship, and the movie does portray him as being mega cuckolded by her, and even changing his military plans to come home and just cover up he literally says he's like, the whole country knows my wife is a slut. And he returns home from the Egyptian campaign because one of his aide-de-camp tells him that his wife is taking a lover, and he's like, prepare me a frigate at once, I'm getting out of here. And they're like, but sir, it's desertion.
That actually had happened much earlier. Her tryst with that guy, that is a real guy who they depict her sleeping with in the movie. But that had happened much earlier. But basically, I mean, what they do depict that, yes, he did have this horrible complex about being cucked by his wife. But after the first year of their marriage, they had this weird sort of tit for tat cheating thing where, he would, because he got back at her by having his own super public affair in Egypt. And then, that kind of the rest of their relationship was like that, where they would they never really forgave each other for some of the stuff that happened right after they got married. And so their whole relationship was just kind of this weird back and forth where they would sort of almost be at war with each other and trying to hurt each other. And then they would, dial it back and reconcile and get super handsy. And there's a great, I read once one of his friends talking about how it was kind of uncomfortable being in a carriage with him and Josephine, because they had their hands on each other all the time in this really confined space where the guy's 2 feet away watching them grope each other.
Ev, what is the historical consensus on what Josephine's zigzags were?
Okay.
Napoleon always talked about this in his letters, and I always figured it was some type of girl on top move, like a very rudimentary one.
Where it's just you're not really stroking, but she's sort of grinding.
Yeah, I figured it was he's the first guy ever to suggest girl on top. That's one of his innovations.
So that is a real thing, the zigzag. It's referenced in letters and it's never explained. And I've actually seen people with PhDs, I have seen debating this, what it was. And it seems to be, now I agree with you, Felix. To me, that strongly suggests a cowgirl scenario. But I've also seen it argued that it was a mouth thing. Which mouth stuff was huge in this era. So
the British, that was their number one insult to the French, is that they make love with their mouths.
Right, yeah.
Think how dangerous it would have been to do mouth stuff in that time. Everyone had it wasn't like now where teeth are a great class signifier. Everyone had fucked up snaggle teeth.
Everyone looked like Shane McGowan. R.I.P.
No, yeah, it was just sticking your cock into a mystery box. You did not know what you were gonna get.
Well, the movie it depicts their letters between them, and their letters between them were. I mean, he was remarkably dirty in the letters, and wouldn't he like to write about sniffing her panties and stuff like that? He was. I mean, like, see, like as a movie, he was very sprung for this Josephine lady.
Yeah, I mean, she was, before the era of mass media, people who were kind of gossiped about and the subject of sort of proto-tabloid gossip were like mistresses of powerful, generals and politicians and stuff. And she was like one of the more famous people in Paris. So she was this kind of desirable, she was like a party girl. She in the movie they show that him meeting her at that kind of weirdo like orgy / classy function.
It's like it's the survivors ball for all the people who were let out after the reign of terror ends, and like all the people waiting for the chop get let out, and they have a big party, and because they're like welcome back into like French society, I guess. Like, was that a real thing?
Those did not really happen. That's a total myth, but it's a kind of a fun myth, though.
Yes, I was thinking like if that was true, the vibe of those parties would have been pretty outrageous.
Well, that era, I mean, they didn't have like survivors balls as is depicted in the movie, but like the era right after the Reign of Terror was an absolute. I mean, the guys who were in power were really corrupt and loved partying and drinking and fucking, and that era was like, I actually really enjoyed that scene because like a lot of history movies would not have gone there, would have depicted it as kind of stately, fancy thing. But no, they really were like just getting drunk and fucking each other while the classical music played in the background.
Well, actually, here's a question about an incident portrayed in the movie that I wanted a historian's perspective on. Did Robespierre actually shoot himself in the face attempting to commit suicide as they hauled him off and then like botched the job? So he literally just put like a ball bearing in his fucking cheek or something.
So that did probably happen. Accounts differ a bit. It didn't happen in the parliament, though. Basically, the scene kind of where he loses control of the legislature did happen kind of roughly as they depict it. But after that happened, he and his friends all ran away to their like secret headquarters. And there is where he shot himself in the face and failed. Again, supposedly there's some differing accounts. Supposedly there's other accounts say it was this National Guardsman who shot him in the face. But either way, when he went to the guillotine, apparently people were, really amped up to see this guy get his head chopped off. And then he shows up and he's like half dead and like can't talk. And people are kind of like, oh, this is a letdown.
Yeah, because I think after if he shot himself, after he was shot, he also like contracted basically surely life-threatening like illness and was basically dying already by the time they got him to the guillotine.
Oh yeah, he would not have lived had they not done that. And he couldn't, I mean, his jaw was blown off. He couldn't talk. He couldn't really eat. He was, basically dying, and they had to just kind of haul him to the guillotine. He didn't have any last words or anything because he couldn't speak. It was kind of a disgusting affair.
Yeah, it really takes the fun out of seeing a public execution. And Ridley Scott always known for subtlety. The movie begins with Napoleon watching Marie Antoinette get her head chopped off. And like they hold it up, they display it to the crowd. Yeah, I assume that was a little bit of artistic license. But just back to Joaquin Phoenix's very odd portrayal of Napoleon here, and like I'm not exaggerating when I say, like, I mean, maybe you disagree with me, but like he plays him like he is in the, to use the in parlance of our times, neurodivergent, and he's a guy that like really doesn't understand social cues or niceties, and is an outsider because he's a Corsican, but also just because he's like kind of weird and is just very good at artillery, but not really at talking to people.
Well, I didn't totally hate that side of his portrayal. I mean, because there is a side of Napoleon that is, I mean, people have debated if he was autistic. There is a side of him that's just kind of introverted and analytical. And it's not so much that he didn't understand social graces. I mean, he like went to a university, which was pretty rare in that time. And he did come from the nobility, the very bottom ranks of the nobility, but still he did have that background. It was more that he didn't give a fuck about social niceties, which when he was very young, he did kind of seem like this outsider, sad sack weirdo. The thing is, when you are also a genius and attain all this power, people view that in a different light. And so he was more of kind of a sort of weird introverted genius than a sort of, grunting weirdo buffoon as he was in the movie. But that's not so far off from the reality.
As in all of your research, has there ever been any firsthand account of Napoleon getting so horny he starts meowing like a cat? Which was my favorite scene in the movie, where he walks in on Josephine and just starts going, and she's with her like attending ladies, and just starts going me me meow meow me me meow 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 meow, and she's like, oh, all right, and then he gives her like 5 seconds of the most spastic back shots, and he's like, oh, ooh, I put that work in, girl. We'll take a baby tonight, and it's just like she's like doing she's doing Sudoku.
That's one thing that actually kind of bothered me. Like, I mean, they were both supposedly very good in bed. It sounds weird to say, but people did talk about that at that time. And so that I wanted, if they're going to show them going at it, there should be some fireworks. Yeah, I did not get that whatsoever.
Like 9.5 weeks or body heat or something.
Will, I saw you posting about his wah 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 horniness scene, and I did want to say that I kind of appreciate that, because the way that you that one performs horniness with a partner, it's based through our mediated times where you've seen examples of maybe how other people are doing that. In the early 1800s, you got to make all that stuff up for yourself. So I imagine that different people have different obscure rituals for announcing themselves to their partners.
Yeah, no one in the 18th century had seen a cartoon of a wolf hitting their head with a big mallet, with a big and their eyes popping out of their head.
You better get the best.
But Ev, I know, for someone who studies this, an aspect of the movie that you found very entertaining, and that I also enjoy it, is when you encounter all your guys. Yes. All the guys that you've been researching and podcasting about, and just delving into their lives. And even if they're just for instance, on our last episode back in 2017, you shouted out one of the great villains of the French Revolution, Fauché, a really venal, evil man who gets name-checked at one time in this movie, but we never get any of his character. Who are some of the other guys that you spotted in this movie that were big for Age of Napoleon?
Oh, man. Well, Marshal Davout, probably Napoleon's greatest subordinate, and my personal favorite of his marshals, is in the movie and only has one line. He's just it's very noticeable because he's this big, giant, fat guy with glasses. And so it's just kind of like, why is there a big fat guy with glasses in the background? But he was a great general and kind of an interesting character. There's also, they kind of combine Marshal Ney and Marshal Murat, who were kind of just two of the most sort of egotistical, peacock, but incredibly brave of Napoleon's marshals. And they don't really get much screen time either. I did enjoy Bara, Napoleon's patron, played by Tahar Rahim,
yes,
who has always been one of my favorites.
Who's in Un Prophet, a great movie with him.
Yeah.
But he was the commissioner of the Revolutionary Army who gives Napoleon his first big assignment, which is the taking of the port city of Toulon, which is the first big battle in the movie, and I thought it was really cool. What about Napoleon's first major W, taking the port of Toulon from the British? How did you feel about that depiction?
I loved that sequence, just from a filmmaking perspective. I thought it looked really cool. It's totally, I mean, they sort of get the headlines right, but it's totally, I mean, the fort that they were attacking was like a entrenchment, basically. It was not like a big medieval castle. It was like some guys found this hill and put a bunch of stakes up and dug entrenchments. So it didn't have that look at all. And the plan to take it was not the plan they show in the movie at all. But they did highlight the, kind of the overarching theme of that battle, which is, seize that one hill and then you can shoot the ships in the harbor. And, as the movie depicts, Napoleon somehow was the only one of the commanders in that theater who figured that out.
Well, I mean, the battles really are the highlight of the movie, and I guess I want to get into them. And how did you think the movie did in terms of depicting what was Napoleon's actual genius as a military commander, and particularly as an artillery commander, and the use of those cannons? There's a point at the end of the movie where he's about to go into exile, and he's addressing a bunch of like British midshipmen who are all like the 12-year-old boy slaves on the British Navy, and he says artillery is simply a matter of geometry. What did he mean by that, Ev? And like, how did the movie depict that?
Well, that to me was actually the single biggest weakness of the movie is you don't get much of a taste of. I think if you didn't know anything about Napoleon, you might walk out of that being like, how the hell did that guy get it to be in charge of anything? Because they don't really depict sort of what made him good at what he did. But they do kind of hint at it at the end, as you said. And that artillery is just geometry he never exactly said that, but that is, you can see where they got that from because he did say things like that. And that is, it's more than just the artillery, though. It's also just kind of, the revolution was, the French army was basically destroyed by the revolution and they had to rebuild it. And so it's just sort of Napoleon understood what the new army built by the revolution could do. And that was sort of, I think, the key to his genius.
I remember from our last episode about the duelists, like a very interesting point about the Napoleonic age and Napoleon, the French army under the command of Napoleon, is that unlike the opponents he was facing in, let's say, Prussia or Austria or the British, they actually like promoted into the ranks of the officer class people who were competent. And not just simply they fell out of the right pussy and like the right castle at the right time. Like it was a meritocratic army in a way that the officer classes of the other European monarchies weren't.
Yeah, it wasn't just the army. Their government was organized that way too. And, it's one of those things that like looking back, it seems so ridiculous. The idea that you would actually not want to have the most qualified people in charge of things. But that is how, the old regime powers thought of the world, that it was more important to sort of maintain the tradition of who is the rightful ruler than it is to actually have the people who are in charge be qualified.
So, it's not hard to see like how he was racking up W after W against opponents of just, a sclerotic officer class of just these bums who have been, handed the commission their entire life.
I did kind of appreciate that they hinted at that with mostly him interacting with the Emperor of Austria, Francis II, and Alexander from Russia, in that they were just oafish little boys who seemed to know nothing about any function of their government or armies, completely intimidated by him. And I feel like that was the intent of representing the rotting wooden edifice that he was pushing against that, allowed him to be the history on horseback.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I actually really enjoyed both of those scenes because I thought that they really nailed the way that these people are treating him with sort of like a mixture of like curiosity, awe, also sort of contempt in a way because they don't see him as one of them. I thought that both of those scenes were very well done in showing that, it was sort of, he thought, hey, I'm emperor now. I'm part of the club. These guys are my peers. But that is really not how he was viewed by other people. And that was a huge problem for his government and one of the main reasons that he ultimately was not successful. Actually, that's one of the things I thought the movie depicted very well.
Yeah, the scene with Alexander II of Russia, where he's like they're chilling in his like in the battlefield tent, and like Alexander II is trying to like sort of be cool with him, and he's like, I really wish we were brothers. And Napoleon goes, funny that you mention it. You have a sister, right? What's the deal with that? And like from that moment, and then Russia completely betrays France and opens up the trade routes to England, and then Napoleon has to invade Russia is his first big L. But like, I guess I think I liked about like the quirks of this era, just how quickly like allegiances changed between these nations. Like, how quickly he goes from being allied with Russia to invading them and losing 500,000 men is kind of funny because it's basically, as the movie portrays it, he asked to marry his 15-year-old daughter, and Alexander would rather burn Moscow to the ground than ever countenance that happening.
Yeah, that is one of the like hard things to wrap your head around in this era is that countries would just jump in and out of bed with each other and would turn on a dime from the war before that, the one depicted when he's in camp with the Russian emperor. The Russians issued an ultimatum to the Prussians saying, "Let us through your territory or we'll declare war on you." And they issued that ultimatum with the expectation the Prussians would refuse and they'd then have to fight the Prussians. the Prussians joined the war on the side of the Russians like a couple months after that. So they really would just kind of, it was not, there was no kind of ideology to it. It was just, whatever's advantageous at the moment. Yesterday's enemy is tomorrow's ally, and vice versa. It's really bizarre, and it's a big reason that there was just constant warfare in that era.
That must have been tough to be like an infantry soldier, the guys who have to like march into formation into grape shot, to know that like if you survive that battle, a month later you'll be like, I don't know, allied with the guys who blew you to shreds.
Yeah, I mean they actually there's a battle, the Battle of Friedland. They talk about that, where Napoleon didn't really pursue the defeated Russian army because he wanted to negotiate a peace treaty, and he was worried that if he killed too many of them after the battle, it would make the peace treaty harder to negotiate. And so he kind of pulled his punches a little bit at the end to just make sure that there were no hard feelings, just a defeat.
Yeah, and again, that one of my favorite scenes with Francis II. I really like the vibe of after Austerlitz, when they're meeting with him, being like, "All right, let's pass around the orange slices. It's you guys put up a good fight, but now it's time to be friends."
Yeah, and that is something that I thought that they captured very well about Napoleon's diplomacy and his political the way he operated politically, is that it was never not never. It was rarely personal for him. And he kind of didn't care much about, he didn't really hold on to grudges. Well, typically didn't. Sometimes he did. But, generally speaking, that was sort of how he operated, where it was, like you said, passing around the orange slices after the game. Great match, guys.
And I mean, that's doubly funny because we were talking about the movie's depiction of the Battle of Austerlitz, in which I mentioned earlier, it depicts like hundreds and hundreds of Austrian soldiers being sunk in an icy lake as they're blown apart with cannon shot. So yeah, pass around the orange slices. It's easy for Francis to do that. That's another thing I liked about this movie. In terms of the guys it depicts, probably my favorite was Rupert Everett as Wellington. And there's a really funny scene at Waterloo when like one of his snipers is like looking through a scope, and he's like, "Sir, I have the Emperor in my sights. Am I green light to take the shot?" And Wellington goes, "Of course not, you idiot. If generals start killing each other, nothing will ever get done." He's like, "If you pull that trigger, we'll kill you."
Yeah, that's the 18th century operator in that. That scene that to me, that was, I mean, of all of the inaccuracies that I could forgive in this movie, that really made me cringe, because I felt like that really added nothing, and it was just this kind of like, it was like a totally modern little snippet, just totally took me out of the movie. They did not have the scoped rifle had not been invented yet. They did not have like individual snipers. Those riflemen fought as units,
Had even the rifled musket been invented at that point? Like, you were basically like shooting and being like, if you had like a 20 by 20 foot square that you could maybe hit.
Yeah, they those guys in the green uniforms in the Waterloo scene, those are the British riflemen. And the rifled
Sharp.
musket was
Shout out Sharp and his boys, Sean Bean.
Which I'm convinced is the only reason that was in there, is because those Brits love their Sharp, and they love the riflemen, and got to include a rifleman if it's going to be a Napoleonic thing. But yeah, that was the very cutting edge of technology. Like that was very impressive to people, that the British were able to field whole regiments of guys equipped with these highly advanced guns that could actually hit the broadside of a barn.
Because like the thing with muskets is like, they weren't accurate, but the ball they were firing was huge, right? Like getting hit with a musket would like put a melon-sized hole in your chest, right? Like,
yeah,
they were just incredibly
huge,
powerful.
Huge, and and made of soft lead, and they traveled really slow. So if you got hit with one of these things, it was just like getting punched in the face with molten lead. It was horrifying what these musket balls would do to people.
A question I had about like the Napoleonic era of combat, and like the sort of almost like the grotesque, absurd parody of like lining up into formation and walking into gunfire. But like, I mean, I was saying, to contrast with the modern era, what were like the Napoleonic wars and like the great scale of devastation and death that they incurred? What was it like? What was a war like for the civilian populations of Europe, and like an era before like air forces and bombardment and things like that?
Well, the scale of warfare really increased over the course of the Napoleonic Wars. Like you look at a battle from like the early phases of the Revolution, and sometimes the armies are maybe maximum like 60,000 men, and then by the end of the Napoleonic Wars, you have battles where the armies have hundreds of thousands of men. So warfare is really increased in scale over this period, but compared to like World War One. Just 100 years later, the armies are much smaller and the wars are much more limited, where the civilian population is not really getting involved. There's not really much of a sense of kind of like being on the home front during a war. Life is quite normal in Paris for most of this time, but it's the beginning of that process where states are sort of getting better at marshaling their resources and, putting men into the field, and not only putting men in the field, but putting men into the field where they can be reliably like equipped and fed and all that and trained, and managing all those logistics. That's just coming into being in the Napoleonic era. That's actually a lot of what made Napoleon and his state so effective, is that he was so good at that kind of increasing the scale of warfare. But compared to what would come even only a century later, it's really small scale.
And you think like as warfare evolved to field more men and keep them in the field of combat, like keep them at war for longer and longer periods of time, like with that comes an increasing toll on the civilian population, I would imagine.
Yeah, and not just a toll on the civilian population, but more that sense of mobilization, wartime mobilization, that had not really existed. Maybe you can talk about kind of specific cases on a smaller scale, but the idea of like a whole society, a whole country mobilizing for the victory had not really existed before the Revolution. The Revolution was sort of what gave birth to that. France was surrounded by enemies, the army was falling apart, and so basically the government kind of turned to the people and said, if we're going to win this thing, we need kind of almost a popular uprising sort of behind the government. And obviously a lot of people in France told them to fuck off, but enough people heard the call that the French were able to win that first war. And that is sort of what set off this chain reaction of the sort of expansion of war and expansion of the wartime state until we get, to the 20th century, where really whole countries are at war.
And considering like France's military history, if you grew up in America or English-speaking countries, France's military output is like a punchline, and it's all based on World War II and the fact that like we're an Anglo country. But really, like, isn't this like the most unfair analogy? Like, doesn't France's reputation as a military power, like, if you're judging it by World War II, like that's cap basically, because they were like the most fearsome military in Europe for like centuries, right?
Yeah, that's something I actually just talked about in my most recent episode, is that, one of the big questions I was looking at is sort of how did other Europeans look at Napoleon, and, why didn't people who came under his rule support him? And part of the reason is that Europeans had it in their heads that the French were these just ruthless conquerors. And so when Napoleon rolls in and says, hey, I've got, big plans for your country, we're going to improve your government and improve your state, people are like, oh yeah, bullshit. We've heard this from the French before. Louis XIV said the same shit and he came and ruined our country. So that was the view of the French really until the 20th century, was that they were these not sort of dour conquerors like we think of the Germans today, but sort of these sort of war-loving kind of,
like sort of
evil gay
sadistic armada. Yeah. And then, it just seems like because Britain was never fully defeated in World War II, and then they got to like sign on to the American Empire. It seems like they got to set in people's minds like the stereotype of the French being effete or sort of lazy and poetic and not given to martial conquest. But like, isn't that just like they're still trying to settle the score from the Napoleonic era when they fought like how many wars against them?
Oh, there was a tiny interlude of peace, but they were basically at war for, almost 2 decades. Again, that's something that I was not anticipating when I started doing the show, that what a sort of load-bearing piece of British history the Napoleonic Wars are. That's really deeply ingrained in the English-speaking world, I think. The idea that Napoleon was this horrible catastrophe that only British grit was able to stop.
Yeah, because it seems like the British view of history is coming out of the 20th century, as Will's saying, is that after the end of World War II, Britain gets to feel like through the entire millennia even of conflict on Europe, they ended up winning that conflict, even if America won over Europe in the end. But they got the last W, so they won the European conflict in total.
Yeah, but
the European Thunderdome, they emerged.
Yeah.
Check the record is what I got to say to that, which leads to, I think, probably the funniest line delivery I will encounter all year at the movies. Joaquin Phoenix in absolute bozo mode when he screams at the British ambassador, "You think you're so good because you have boats?" And, and when leading up to Waterloo, Napoleon says, like, this is a fight on land, which the British can't do. And then we get into the whole master and commander universe of, oceans are now battlefields, about they were getting washed on on dirt under their feet. But the British fleet, the British Navy, was really that they were going toe to toe with the French, right?
Yeah, the French. I talked earlier about the French army falling apart because of the Revolution. The same thing happens to the French Navy. The problem is, with the army, you can kind of throw guys into combat with relatively little training on the land, and they'll, it's horrible.
You shove a musket in their hand and say, "Walk in that direction, asshole." We'll shoot you.
And it's like horrible to think, but over time, the survivors learn their lessons, right? It doesn't work that way on the water. You need, a naval officer of that era could literally just feel the ocean under their feet and know, what was going on 30, 40 miles away. You can't just kind of throw people into that and be like, figure it out. Use your revolutionary zeal to overcome your lack of experience.
I mean, say what you will about the British Navy's use of boy slaves. It made good seamen.
That system, it's like you read about these guys joining up at some of these guys were 9 years old. And it seems just so barbaric and stupid. And a 9-year-old on a warship in a war. But it did produce these guys who were capable of doing amazing things. So it's, this is a disgusting era of history. What can you say?
People really didn't realize, have the thought, oh, maybe we shouldn't, have children do this until, well into World War I, really.
Yeah, there were still, in World War I, there were still, young teenagers on some of the British ships. That had not totally died out. The last of those guys actually just died this year.
Oh. In the Patrick O'Brien Master and Commander books, I think even as early as the first one, there's, always talk on the ship about, the scuttlebutt about which one of the officers is going to interfere with one of the 9-year-olds that they have crewing this warship. But I'll tell you what, next to the boy slaves, the worst aspect of Napoleonic combat for me, as depicted in this movie, were the guys in every army whose job it was to walk into gunfire just drumming, just keeping pace, just drumming. And there's a scene where there's a guy just drumming by himself, and he gets hit with a cannonball and blows up. And I just think about those guys who never even had a chance. They weren't even they didn't even have a chance to clap back. They were just doing a little tune. They were just playing a little tune, and then they get shot in the face. Come on. The drumming, was it really that important?
One of the things that they don't show and they can't show in movies that depict combat of this era, smokeless gunpowder had not been invented yet. So these battles, you cannot see shit. Literally.
Oh, yeah. It just must have been like a total haze of just white smoke.
That's why they wear those crazy uniforms, is because you got to stick together with your guys. And so, it's good to have, a big tall hat, big shiny uniform so that you can see each other on this just, totally smoke shrouded battlefield. And, the combat it makes a lot more sense if you imagine no one can see anything, because, if you're in the very front of one of those columns marching towards the enemy, you do at least have in your head, hey, they can't really see me. Maybe I can get through this.
We're just like, it just looks like a sort of like a undifferentiated mass of red or blue, and you're just like shoot in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, you read, there's a reason that they did all the crazy drills of this era, because these battles are so disorienting. The sound of these cannon in particular, but also the muskets when they're all fired all at once, is completely deafening. There's people screaming constantly. I mean, every account of a battle from this era talks about that. So you can't hear anything, you can't see anything. Not only is there gunpowder from everyone else around you firing, when you fire a musket like that, you have a little primer of gunpowder like right next to your face that explodes. So these guys are all getting like a little explosion in their face like every minute or so when they fire their muskets. I mean, it's just a totally disorienting, inhuman experience. So you need all this training that you can just kind of fall back on, because there's no way you can really interpret what's going on around you.
And to that end, I appreciated the depictions of the British Army at Waterloo, like reforming their infantry lines into anti-cavalry squares and stuff. I thought that was at least a very cool depiction of the use of infantry formations.
Yeah, although it's funny, they depict Waterloo as being fought in trenches, which there were no trenches. I mean, it's raining. How are you going to dig a trench, right? And it actually, if the battle had been fought the way in the movie they depict it, they would have been very stupid to come out of those entrenchments to fight the cavalry. That's one of the reasons you dig entrenchments. It's the cavalry through them.
Yeah, Wellington says, prepare for a cavalry charge, and all the soldiers get up out of the trench and march in front of it.
Yeah.
I guess another question I had, like, particularly, like, obviously, like, in the movie, like, the time has to be condensed with these battles, as grand as they are. But the impression I got from the movie was that, like, Austerlitz and Waterloo were over in, like, less than an hour. Is that true, or did these things go on much longer than the movie depicts?
Yeah, I would say that's probably my one of my biggest gripes with the battles is they all seem like really short. I think the shortest of the battles that they depict is Austerlitz, which lasted from like basically dawn, like 6 a.m, until like 4 or 5 in the evening, and that's the shortest of them. So most of the time, these things are going from just before daylight until nightfall. In a lot of cases, they're taking place over multiple days. So that was, again, I'm not sure how much better they could have done. It's a 2.5-hour movie about like the craziest event in history. So kind of limited time.
Like 6 of the craziest events in history.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess like just taking overall, like, we hear stories about rich guys buying Napoleon's hats. What is that? Brian Goldberg currently has Napoleon's hat. But like overall, like the movie arrives here, like what Napoleon is still such a stand-in for so much in our culture. But like, what do you think Napoleon means now to our culture? Is it just an aspirational figure for like other wannabe powerful men? Or is it like, is it the hope of that like one guy can change the world? Or is it a mix of both?
Well, I think, Napoleon is such a big figure and his life was so crazy and kind of had so many different sides to it. People tend to see what they want to see when they look at him. That's, to me, that's kind of one of the important things to keep in mind when I'm doing my research, is that like there is this tendency to people to see themselves in him, either, aspirationally or, as literally just, an echo of their own character. And I do find it kind of amusing that all these rich guys, first of all, the rich guy who bought Napoleon's hat is a listener of mine, so shout out. It's funny to me because, again, I just did this episode on kind of Napoleon's impact around Europe. And, kind of the main, if you zoom out from his crazy life and all the battles, what really makes him important is that he was the destroyer of the old order and the person who sort of bulldozed away all the dead wood that had accumulated over the Middle Ages to make way for the modern world. And so it's funny to me that, these rich guys who idolize him, if you went back in time and met kind of the equivalent person in the 1800s, they hated Napoleon. I mean, they thought that he was the Antichrist, in some cases quite literally. And it's, it always makes me think, maybe in 200 years, rich guys will all have, Stalin memorabilia and like Stalin stuff on their walls because, he's a great leader, right? He's one of the most impactful men in history. I could be a great man too, just like Stalin. And it's funny to me how that, just with time, sort of the the ideology falls away, and what was once radical about Napoleon just kind of is no longer really part of the conversation around him in pop culture. But really, that's what's important about him. I mean, the battles are interesting, and his life is, fucking crazy. But at the end of the day, that's just a story. What's really significant, what people should take away from this is, what was the broader significance to the human race of all this crazy stuff going on, which is, not very cinematic, unfortunately.
And, I guess like in terms of like contemporary political language, Napoleon has always been kind of a boogeyman to the right because he represents, revolution and like unrestrained, like as you said, a violent overthrow of the entire old order and the creation of like a new modern era. But I'm wondering, if you've noticed that like right wingers have now kind of come around on Napoleon, even British ones. I'm thinking specifically about that guy, Andrew Roberts. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Oh,
He's
yeah,
a member of the
book.
House of Lords. And he was the guy who wrote the piece last week about how Hamas is worse than Hitler. But I think it's interesting, particularly on the British right wing, of the evolution of thinking of Napoleon as a monster and a tyrant that like Britain's defeat of gives them the right to lord it over the rest of the world forever. To now, I think like they admire and then crave being ruled by a strong man and a tyrant who has like, won the world through military conquest.
Well, part of it is because he was so successful, someone who in a previous generation is a destroyer, he helped set up a new order. And now, because 200 years have passed, conservatives are very attached to the new order Napoleon helped establish. So, yesterday's radical becomes, today's, bedrock of the status quo. So it's really, to me, a measure of, people's inability to look at kind of history as a process and, just looking purely at sort of who Napoleon represented. He was the avatar of sort of new money rich people and liberal noblemen and white collar professionals. And, at that time, right, at that time, those people were kind of on the margins and trying to get their due. Today, those are the people who run our world. And so, naturally they do, some of them at least, feel this affinity to a guy who did, fight for that class's interests.
Yeah, but now that like now that today's modern conservative would like very much like to take the world away from the liberal managerial class, I think that they're sort of resurrecting Napoleon as the hope of some guy who can wash away in the course of a lifetime the social order of the world that you're born into.
Yeah, and that's that's going to be an inherently romantic. I mean, even Ridley Scott, who, as we saw, has a very jaundiced view of Napoleon, couldn't help. The tagline of the movie is "He came from nothing, he conquered everything." That's going to be an inherently attractive part of his story.
And one last question on Napoleon. He did have a brother, correct?
He had many brothers, actually. They kind of combined them all into one in the movie. But he had he had a huge family who he had a very loving, and yet would it surprise you to hear that Napoleon was also kind of domineering? He had a very interesting relationship with his family, which they combined them all together into the one character.
I didn't know the brother in the movie was an amalgamation of many brothers, but I only bring up Napoleon's brother by way of mentioning that Ridley Scott also has a brother, Tony, who's better than him. Movie Mindset, episode 1.
Just on Napoleon's family, because I think it just came up in the Run of Hell of Presidents, or that we're posting on Patreon. One of Napoleon's brother is the grandfather of a man named Charles Bonaparte, who was the founder, the first director of the Bureau of Investigation in America, which later became the FBI. Yes. So the FBI was first led by Napoleon's grandnephew, which also tags into the other movie I finally saw this week, which is Killers of the Flower Moon. So, his thinking that those two movies are linked through the Napoleon family lineage was, just an interesting historical trivia to me.
Yeah, Charles Bonaparte's a pretty interesting guy, actually.
Yeah.
People should look him up.
I will say, I will compare Napoleon to the other movie I saw this week, which is Sofia Coppola's Priscilla. And this is basically Napoleon is Priscilla, but for guys. It's a movie about Priscilla is about a young girl who is sort of groomed into the life of the most famous man on the planet, not quite prepared for it. Josephine is quite prepared for it, becoming the mistress of or the lover, the wife of the most powerful man alive. Because like Elvis, Napoleon, they were similar figures of their era. But yeah, it's a movie. Yeah. It's a movie it's a curated experience of vibes for men who are into the military combat of a previous era. I will leave it there today. Ev, I want to thank you so much for joining the show, and also to recommend Age of Napoleon to our listeners. I would, dare I say, if you are a fan of Hell on Earth and have not already listened to Age of Napoleon, you should definitely check it out.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. That's you're too kind.
Well, I'll be kinder to you than I am to the vile tyrant Ridley Scott.
I'll say this. It is one thing that I couldn't help thinking as I walked out of it was that the idea, Scott made this movie with a middle fingers raised to historians, did it how he felt like it, made something completely outrageous that pissed a lot of people off. It's very Napoleonic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess for that he should be lauded before being sent into exile. Hopefully,
that's what I kind of couldn't help thinking coming out of it is that this movie kind of seems like a Napoleon movie that Napoleon would make.
I mean, he would be better at sex in the Napoleon movie.
Yes, other than that part, yeah. But yeah.
All right, let's leave it there for today. Everett, thanks so much for coming on the show, and please check out Age of Napoleon.
Thanks a lot.
All right, till next time, everybody. Bye-bye.